Nice. Oh, hi, everybody. Welcome back to Redemption Thursdays. A few minutes late. We had a little bit of technical difficulty. I'm sorry about that. Rabbi Winston will be on soon. I just want to thank you for coming back time and time again to hear Rabbi Winston, Pinchas Winston from Telstone, giving us his enormous amount of knowledge about Kabbalah 101, which we're talking about tonight. This is part 2 of Kabbalah 101. Also discussing end of days topics, redemption topics, living in the times of redemption, and also how we could prepare for the final Geula. You can get Rabbi Winston's his multitude of books and writings and webinars, videos on his website 36.org. And he will be on soon. I want to show you some of books, most recent book being ETA, Estimating the Final Time of the Arrival of Mashiach. The Survival Guide for the End of Days is an amazing book also. And one of my very favorites that he'll be talking about after the Kabbalah session, we'll be talking about redemption from the time between Purim and Pesach, and how that's so important to all redemptions, including this upcoming final redemption soon in our days. And thank you for joining us, Rabbi Winston.
Welcome. Thanks. Okay. After last week's introduction, I think it's a good thing to be exposed to the beginning of the beginning. This is a sefer called Oshus Chaim, like that. There you go. By the Arizal. Oshus Chaim, actually, or Eitz Chaim is one of the main works of the Arizal. The Eitz Chaim itself is the teachings of the Arizal. He died at the age of 38. He died very young. His premier student was Chaim Vital, who was older than him. Nice long story to do with how they came together, and the Arizal himself, he had written notes in his own handwriting, which are very hard to understand. Most of what we have today was called the Kisvei Arizal. The writings of the Arizal came through Chaim Vital, who took notes and made notes, and then eventually we had to flee to Damascus for a specific reason. Nothing to do with him personally. He wasn't running from the authorities per se, but he went to Damascus, and he buried his writings because he didn't, I guess, think the world was ready for them yet. Eventually, they were discovered in the 1600s, and they were deciphered by various different students of Kabbalah, and perhaps even the Arizal himself. And they basically organized them. Shmuel Vital was Rav Chaim Vital's son, and he found many different writings from his father, and he organized a lot of it in the beginning. There's been different attempts to organize the material. Sometimes it seems superfluous, sometimes it seems out of order, but for the most part, it's there. And the Arizal, he himself didn't write down the Sfarim, just that the teachings are his. And Eitz Chaim was one of the main works. There's different Sfarim. There's all set of Kisvei Arizal. There's actually 8 gates, one of which is Shar HaGilgulim, gate of reincarnations, which we discussed in the past. There's all Shar Psukim, which talks about the different verses of the Chumash, and also from Navi as well, Ksuvim. And Eitz Chaim is like one of the 3 volumes. Depends on the, actually it can be just 1 volume too. Depends how big the sefer is, but it goes through the fundamentals according to Kabbalah of how Hashem made creation, as much as we know, as much as that information has been shared with us. Obviously, there's so much we don't know and don't understand, and what they understood and revealed to us is a fraction, of what they actually knew. So they reveal very little and hid a lot. So it's kind of hard to imagine what's missing because we don't understand and appreciate, but this is what we have. And a lot of this actually is based upon the Zohar, which goes back much earlier in time. It wasn't printed till much later, until around 1300s. But the material is traceable back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, Idra Rabba, Idra Zuta, very abstract. And, the same way, for example, or it's the opposite. If you look at the Chumash, and you look at Mishnah, which is the main body of Torah Sheba'al Peh, and you look at the Gemara, you find basically that they're always discussing matters of this world. They don't really get mystical at all. Even the Gemara, once literally here and there, like in Chagiga, a couple of places talks about Kabbalah. You forget that the authors of the Gemara from the Mishnah they were some of the premier Kabbalists of their time who passed down the generation of Kabbalah. They didn't talk about it, but it's all built into what they say, if you know how to interpret it. One of the Sforim of the Rizal is Maimer Chazal, which Drushim Maimer Chazal, where he takes Gemaras and explains to us to some degree what they mean in terms of Kabbalah. It's actually very, very fascinating to look at, and also Likuti Torah, where he looks at the verses and tells you what's going on at a much deeper level. But Eitz Chaim, that's where you find most of the material that describes the beginning of creation, the beginning of existence. And to someone who hasn't learned this, doesn't know Kabbalah, so when you think of the beginning of creation, you think of when God said, "Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'haaretz." In the beginning, that God created the heavens and the earth, and that's the beginning. Up in the Chumash, that's where it begins. What happens before the Chumash, before the Torah, we don't know. It's closed off. Even the Gemara seems to imply that we're not supposed to look at that. That what happened before is off limits. But it's not talking about that. It seems to, but it's not. If you understand what it really means, and when you read Eitz Chaim, and you look at the material inside, then you see how much we actually know. As one Rav once put it, that the reason why the Torah begins with the base, the Medrash explains that the base has different meanings. For example, it's open to the left, which means what comes after is an open book. What comes before is a closed book because of the wall of the base there. Base also means two, and two represents a creation, different species, and that's all part of this world. The world that we live in is called Olam HaPerid, which is the world of separation, the world of gashmis and materialism, and kinds and many kinds, and and what comes before that is that's what really Kabbalah deals with. Kabbalah does not deal so much with history post Ma'aseh Bereshis, or it's called Tikkun Ma'aseh Bereshis. Actually deals with what came before, and would never ever know from the Chumash that there was a before, and not what you see actually is the before. So this is about the before. This talks about the before. Now, why is it so important to know this? And the truth is that last night, for example, after Mari, I was meeting a man, older man than me, and turned to me in the 70s, and he said to me, that's the lesson you're learning. As far as I met who the lesson was, but I said, yeah. He said, you understand it? And I said, I hope so. I'm working on it, trying to. And he said, I tried it, not for me. Even Derech Hashem, which is deep, but not so obviously Kabbalistic. He said, didn't go in. Hard to believe, because Derech Hashem is learned with a lot of people on various different levels. I think it comes down to the teacher who's teaching, who's giving over how well they understand it. A lot of times when it comes to this type of education, learning, it comes down to analogies. A lot of how you can express very deep and high concepts in everyday terms. Not Kabbalists are happy about it. A lot of Kabbalists believe that Kabbalah is not something that should be discussed. Certainly not amongst everybody down below. You actually don't articulate it. You actually just learn it. And it's more of an intellectual, cerebral learning, because it's so high up. But that's not necessarily the prevalent opinion, as you see also that it's been taught and written about, and there's an explosion. In fact, many say that we have this concept of Yeridas Hadoros. Yeridas Hadoros means literally the going down of the generations. But at Mount Sinai, which happens to be this week's Parsha, God revealed himself as much as ever to mankind, and spoke to the Jewish people and gave the Ten Commandments, at least two of them directly, and the rest through Moshe. But they could hear God speak to them. So they certainly came from God. And it was an awesome and exciting event that turned everybody into a Kabbalist right off the bat. So, because we'll see, that's really what Kabbalah is all about. He's going to explain it, we'll talk about it. But the point of Kabbalah really is to have that revelation of God and to connect to God. That's the main reason we're learning. It's not just an intellectual exercise. In fact, if you're learning Kabbalah like a real serious, not just like, be exposed to it. It's being exposed and it's learning it, really trying to understand it. And it's not making you feel more of the divine presence, then there's something wrong with the way you're learning it. But his comment was basically like, as if, well, it's not for me. I don't need it. And the truth is, it's not so untrue, because the Arizal brings down in Shar HaGilgulim that there are different types of souls. And there's some souls that are meant to be Tamei Chachamim from day one. That's just built into their soul from where they come from. There's some souls that are more the language that he uses, disappointing in some respects. I like to believe we all have equal opportunity to rise to high levels, but and then some souls that really are meant to be a maratzim. Everyone fills a role, and God evaluates everyone based upon their capability, not by comparing one person to another person, and unless they are equals, and even then he still doesn't do it. There's always the possibility to change. Also in Shar HaGilgulim, just to make the point, that it is also through desire. If a person really wants to go to a higher level than their soul allows them to go, they can actually draw down to them a higher level soul that will assist them to reach higher heights. So really it comes down to ratzon, it comes down to will. And this man basically, didn't have the will, didn't seem to be interested. I even offered, I said, if you want, I'll be happy to try, and show you some things, and who knows, maybe he'll come back. But he didn't feel it was necessary. It's not so unlike, the whole concept of aliyah, right? And I realize it's a long backward introduction to these ideas, but just to make it, it's always good to have a good base to work from. It's like aliyah. You talk to some people, and it's not for me. Maybe one day, maybe when Mashiach comes, and we all have to go back anyhow. And I've heard people tell me that even when Mashiach does come, they won't have to go back, and they're happy about that. Like, that's already really extreme. Most people, at least they'll admit that when Mashiach comes, they all have to go back, and that's them to go back, right? But so many people, at one point in time, me included, didn't want to come here at all. It's like, this is the last place in the world that we wanted to live. It wasn't relevant to us. And then you find out what life is about, what Torah is about, what you're supposed to achieve, what you're about, and what Eretz Yisrael is all about. And then when it all comes together, all of a sudden it changes your ratzon, your will changes, and this is the place you want to be. So a person who says it's not for me, it doesn't always mean that it's not for them. It means basically they haven't got to the point yet where they understand and appreciate why it is for them. And a good example is a Baal Tshuva. Because a Baal Tshuva grows up thinking that they don't need Shabbos, they don't need kashrus. Kashrus is a pain in the neck. You can't eat everywhere they want to eat, especially in the business world. You're a secular Jew, and learning Torah, and keeping the mitzvahs, it's a burden. And if you say to someone, you're so uninterested, I'm not going to teach you anything about Judaism. He's going, great, that's exactly what I want. But it's not. It's what he thinks he wants. And a Baal Tshuva, for example, who finally comes to terms with this and realizes this is the way to go in life, and this is what they've been missing, doesn't usually say, well, thank God I wasn't religious for 22 years. At least I got to enjoy trait and things like that. Now I am. I woke up and realized, when I first became, I was already at this point committed to being from when I first became, Choseh B'Tshuva. And one of my first Shabbos is with a religious family in Toronto. I remember standing around the kitchen with the balabayas, and he's talking to me, and he's asking me questions. Why? And he turns to me, and one of the shocks of my life, even at that early stage of my life, he says, "Why'd you do it?" I said, "Well, because it's the truth and it's Torah." I'll give him all those pat answers. And he said, "Yeah, but you could eat treif and not feel bad about it." I went, "Excuse me?" He's like, "You mean you're missing that?" It's like I was like, that's important. You're feeling bad. Obviously there was something wrong with his perspective on things, and he didn't understand, appreciate what it was all about. But a frum person about Shu doesn't say, at least I had 22 years of freedom, and now I'm no longer free. It's more like they'll say things like that. Wow, if only I had known earlier. If I'd known then what I know now, I would have changed over a long time. I would become from a long time ago, because look what I've missed out. As a Choseh B'Tshuva, you like to believe that you didn't waste the first part of your life completely. You like to believe that you gain skills and things, and experiences that are going to help you and help the frum world. And it is true, by the way. You see it all the time. So much of the advancement of the frum world to be able to cope, and excel and even improve education that come because of a lot of Bali Tshuva who brought with them their experiences that they gained in the business world, and now that they're from to use it for the Torah way. So there's no question that's all part of the master plan. That's why God does things like that. All through history, we've been doing that in different societies, right? But I sort of had a cold awakening one day when I remember that my Rosh Hashiva had come for Shabbos, and he had brought some of his sons with him, and some are 15, 16 years of age. And we had our Suda, the Shabbos morning Suda. And one of the rare occasions, I went to the base medrash after lunch. Usually go to take a nap, but I went there to do a little bit of learning. And I walked into the base medrash, and there were not a lot of people there at that time, but one of the Rosh Hashiva's sons at that time was 15, and he was learning. And he was learning Gemara. And even though I didn't have that much experience yet in learning Gemara, so I didn't have much love for it at that point in time. Far from mastering it. It was a big struggle. But listening to him, the ease with which he learned and the joy in his voice, you could hear the way he was singing the words. All of a sudden, I felt like, wow, if I had begun, and he had begun, then I could be there too. And it's like literally made me feel like, no, they were a big waste of years. Okay, in the end, Baruch Hashem, not everything was, and you try and you have to move on and accomplish, but there's no question that we make that mistake. Today we think we don't need something, and we push it away, and we think we don't make the effort, and then later on we find out that it's not true, that we do need it. I mean, just as a side point, just if this doesn't make the point on some level, right? The Zohar says anyone who learns Zohar, especially at the end of days, is going to be able to be free of all the problems of the war of Gog and Magog and Chevli Mashiach, all the birth pangs of Mashiach and the war of Gog and Magog. It won't touch them. Somehow they'll be protected from it. But not those who learn Gemara. We saw that in Europe, that's for sure. Not those who, certainly lower than that, Mishnah and Chumash, they don't protect you. I mean, there's a certain amount of protection you get from doing a mitzvah, that's for sure. But it depends. It's a time of Shemata, it's a good time of Gezerah, that Hashem is now doing his, whatever he's doing to bring an exile to the end. So, so why would the Zohar be the protection? It's just a skula, or no, it's the learning of it. So what's the learning? What's different about that? So the Leshem explains. He says that if you look at about the Gemara, and you look at the Mishnah, you look at the Chumash, they're all talking about everyday events, everyday actions. The Chumash are stories about the Avos and Achava and Cain and Hevel, and later on the Jewish people in the Midbar and Har Sinai. It's all historic events. There's nothing really mystical. There's mysticism built into it. If you ask some good questions, you'll realize there's what to look at. But for the most part, it's just it's things that we can relate to in everyday life. The Mishnah is just concerned with everyday halacha, how to live as a good frum Jew, how to do the halachas properly. The Gemara is just the discussions behind the Mishnah. You walk into Beis Medrash, you walk into an Iyun Kollel, right? A Kollel that people are serious learners. They've been learning for a long time. They're married already, and they're going to the next level, and they're doing Iyun. They're learning Hilchos Shabbos, Hilchos Tahari, Hilchos Kashrus, all the important subjects that they're learning them in depth. They're taking the concept of Malacha, for example, on Shabbos, and they're understanding it to the nth degree so they can maybe one day be poskim. These are people who can make halachic decisions because technology is constantly changing. The principles never change. They're always the same. And no matter how far we advance in this world, it can always be taken back to the 39 malachas on some level. And that's what the poskim do. They analyze it. They talk to scientists or doctors or whoever's, the people, the experts, and they break it down until they get to an understanding. Does this fall in the category of bona, a building, or is this fire? Is it like what's the main thing happening in terms of malacha, so you can decide whether this is permissible on Shabbos or not, and how it might be permissible, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Kashrus, for example, right? They now have meats that have been synthesized from fats and all that, and they go through a process, And they're completely parv, even though they came from me originally, because the halacha, they had to analyze it though, to break it down and see how it fits into the Shulchan Aruch. We don't have to depart from that because those are eternal principles. And this is what's going on in every base medrash. This is what people are learning, except amongst the Kabbalim, the Kabbalistic base medrash. They're learning what we're going to talk about in a second. But that's all called Eitzadas Tovara. Anything that deals with the matters of this world, because everything in this world is a function of good and evil. Kosher and treif. Kosher and puzzle, right? These are all terms that apply in halacha. What about this? Kosher. What about this? Treif, puzzle, asur, right? These are all things that have two sides to them. And because of that, they're part of what's called Eitzadas Tovara, the tree of knowledge, good and evil. But if you open the Idra Rabbah, Idra Zuta, not the part of the Zohar that are discussing, the Parsha and things like that. That's more like Medrash, deep Medrash, but Medrash. You open the sections of the Zohar, like Sifrit Snusa and Sisrei Torah, even these are different parts where Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai taught over to his Talmidim the principles of creation from before Ma'aseh Bereshis, the spheres, and what goes on, how they were built, and why they were built that way, and what's the impact, what's the relationship. These are all part of what's called Eitz Chaim. There's nothing, not pretty much nothing, in those pages you will find that makes any reference to something going on in everyday life. It's like taking place on a whole different plane, literally. So that's called Eitz Chaim because that's the Eitz Chaim is up there by the higher levels where the klipos evil can't get to. It's just too high up in the system. So because evil cannot be there, there's no ta'arovis of tovara. There's no mixture of good and evil. And as a result of that, it's called Eitz Chaim. So on that level, there's no need to become more aware of God because that's all you're doing. That's all you're being aware of. That's the whole, it's like literally being in front of God as much as humanly possible in this world. And the war of Gog and Magog and Chavle Mashiach really is part of the preparation for the final redemption. But more than that, it's meant to really fulfill the pasuk we see, because it goes back and forth to the revealed and unrevealed, right? Zachariah just says, and we say it every day in Aleinu, and once you know this, it's a different Aleinu. People just rattle off Aleinu, the last few psukim, just like that, not necessarily knowing what it's talking about, even though the words are obvious, right? Where it says that God will be king over all the land, finally. I mean, he already is, but everyone will acknowledge that. That's the main thing over here, right? And on that day, what day? When Mashiach finally comes, God will be one, and His name will be one, right? Because Amalek divides that. What does it mean? His name will be one. It means that we won't talk out of two sides of our mouth. We won't talk about God and serving Him and living by Torah mitzvahs, and then go do self-serving things as if He doesn't exist. Because there's a big inconsistency between what we know and how we act. That's our generation, right? That's what Kabbalah comes to fill. As we go down the road, it just becomes worse to a large degree because we become spiritually less sensitive because things like science and technology kind of like suck the reality of God out of life, out of the soul type of, because they make everything so mechanical with an emphasis on that God wasn't involved, doesn't need to be involved. So I mentioned that the Yeridus Adoris means that the generations get weaker ever since Mount Sinai. But that's only with Torah's Nigla, Chazal explained. That's only talking about the revealed Torah, meaning that when it comes to Mishnah and Gemara, you see, Sforim lead to more Sforim, which lead to more commentary and more commentary. Things that once upon a time, the average person who learned just knew it. You had to talk about it because it was just so obvious. Today we need to explain it and break it down, and it's all to do with understanding how to function in everyday life as a good Torah Jew. So we don't make a mistake and do an avera and destroy the world and destroy our portion of what to come. But it's all to do with everyday action. That's Eitzadas Tovara. So on that level, you see inconsistency. You see how difficult it is to become a tzaddik. It should be easy. It should be. We think it should be easy, but it's very easy for that to become technical Torah that lacks soul. lacks certain life force. It's the opposite when it comes to pure Kabbalah. And when you get that, not only does it elevate you, but it puts you more in touch with yourself because it's putting you more in touch with the Kodesh Baruch Hu directly. And even though today many people believe, I hear it, it's nice, perhaps one day when I'm retired and I'm 80 years, 80 years of age, and someplace on the hills of Svat, and maybe I'll take out, I'll start learning then. But in the meantime, I get by just fine without it. But that's only because we don't realize it, what we're missing, what we're losing out on, what we have to, what it could to enhance our life. And that's often true until you take the time to understand it, because you look at the world, what's going on today, just a simple point, right? So on a simple level, and the everyday level, right, you just see people making choices or lack of them and going a certain direction and producing certain, either propaganda or products or direction in life. It's like society is constantly evolving, but it's just people making decisions based upon how they feel, what they think, what they discover, what they understand. They don't look at themselves as puppets. They don't look at themselves as instruments of something at either a higher level or more nefarious level. For example, right, the Garden of Eden, Chava. Now you have to understand that's Eve, right? That the snake in the beginning was not even in the Garden of Eden. It couldn't get in because the Garden of Eden was too high a level. So how did he get in? Did he get past the security guards, the bouncers? He disguise himself as a human being. How did the snake get into the Garden of Eden? So Adam Rishon, he already started doing a chet. He already started changing the world because of what he was up to, which is a discussion to itself. But that changed the world, lowered it already, even though it was still the Garden of Eden, but it was on a lower level. The snake was able to get in. Okay, fine. Now the snake is in. Now the snake's talking. Now we don't get too many talking snakes these days, right? But that one was special. He was able to talk, and he was able to stand up too, for that matter. And the Gemara says he was actually supposed to serve Adam Rishon and be kind of like a butler for him and a pal. But he became just the opposite because Adam was already going down the wrong path. So therefore, the snake was going to. But the snake, he never spoke to Chava, but he spoke to Chava. It says right there, snake spoke to Chava. Well, it wasn't his words. Because what happened instead was that the Sitra Achra, which is the Satan, right? That's his called in English, or the Satan in Hebrew, right? He actually went into the snake and spoke to Chava through the snake. Now she saw a snake, and she thought she was talking to the snake. If she knew that she was talking to the Sitra Achra, who basically took over the snake to talk to her and cause her to deviate, then she would have walked away and wouldn't have got involved. She would know that that's a trick. But that's how the Sitra Achra is very tricky, right? So why the snake specifically? Because Kabbalah explains, because the snake was made as kind of a vehicle for things like this, if this is what history needs. And once you understand the dynamics of the discussion, what's going on, and you can figure out, how God works in this world to some degree, it changes your vision. You look at the world completely different, and it opens up doors and vistas and opportunities. It's a little frustrating sometimes to watch other people around you not see it the same way and not respond to it the same way. But that's the world. That's not everyone sees things the same way. But blessed is the person who understands these concepts and can implement them by looking at the simple world around them and see what's going on and say, that's because of this. Because it makes it a lot easier to put up with and understand the direction of history. Otherwise, the world today looks like it's Africa. It looks like it's like literally just lost control. People do what they want, say what they want, get away with whatever they want. A person has an opinion. Once upon a time, a person rose to the top because they had good opinions. They had wisdom. If you didn't have wise opinions and it wasn't matching the truth, you didn't go anywhere. You just stayed on a low level. With social media, people can say whatever they want, sound like they know what they're talking about, convince a lot of people they know what they're talking about, and be completely wrong about life. That's part of the confusion of today. And hatred and the wrong type of hatred and the wrong type of resentment and a big ball of guns. So it looks like it just exploded, but it didn't. It's been perfectly following a specific track that goes back long before our generation, right? Kabbalah, I didn't finish this thought 3 times already, right? Kabbalah, unlike Torah Shebaal Peh, which has been getting weaker since Mount Sinai, Kabbalah itself is becoming more revealed. Once upon a time, it was literally from mouth to ear, from one student from one teacher to a student, and that's the way it was until around 1200. And then it became more open, and it was published. The Zohar was published, but even still, it was very hard to understand. It was very abstract because the world itself was not cut up. Technology wasn't so advanced. In our generation, the amount of Sforim, the amount of Kabbalah Sforim that are being printed and published on YouTube and even wiki text, Wikipedia, it's like literally. On one hand, it's a little bit disturbing because it's almost like a profanation of something so holy. But on the other hand, it also makes it far more accessible, and everything is divine providence. Even if God doesn't approve of something, it's still divine providence. It's still part of the master plan. And as wild and out of control as everything seems to be, and bad guys overcoming good guys, or not even sure which one's which in the end, nothing's out of control. The whole show is basically following a master plan that even precedes my separation. Has been going on for thousands of years and will come to a conclusion exactly as planned from the very beginning. And the choice that we have as individuals is either to be pawns in all of this, just like, literally on the chessboard, there's little, characters that don't do too much, can't move too much, or what we call machers, makers of history. People who, because the reality is that God's doing everything, but He offers the astute individual, the person who's ready, he's mukshert for this particular task. You made yourself into somebody whom God can plug into this particular thing and make it look as if you're the one doing it. Like saving a patient, right? Not every doctor saves every patient. Not every operation ends successfully. Sometimes good doctors fail and bad doctors succeed, and vice versa. But every patient who dies is because that's the time they had to go. And whether or not the doctor will be the one who presided over a surviving patient or a non-surviving patient has a lot to do with has everything to do with the personal hashgacha pratis of the person, what they made themselves into, what role they were going to play in history. And that becomes easier to fashion once you understand the rules. So, having said that, and used up most of my time in the process, right, at least we'll start. And then, B'ezras Hashem, next week, I will spend less time introducing the topic and spend more time explaining it instead. So, he begins by saying the following thing. This is Hakdam Echad Gedola Kolelis Min Ein Sof Ad Zeir Anpin. I'm going to give you an introduction, he says, that is going to basically incorporate everything from what's called Ein Sof to Zeir Anpin. That's not going to mean too much to anybody right now, unless you have a Kabbalistic background. We'll get to these, hopefully, eventually, some of these ideas later on. But it just another way of saying, Kabbalistically, that what I'm about to tell you is really what's running the whole show. It's really what the whole thing's about, all of it, from beginning until end. So let's start. He says, you have to know, Ki Tichilus HaKol Haya Kol HaMetzius or Pashuv Nikra Ein Sof. Very easy concept to say, very difficult concept to express and understand. Put it in terms to understand, we have discussed it before several times in the past. But our world is finite. Period. We have infinite within us because we can't exist otherwise, which raises the philosophical question how the infinite can exist inside the finite, because usually something bigger does not fit in something smaller. But that's part of the miracle of life. But we are finite. This is not the way it always was. At one point in time, there was nothing finite in existence. The potential for something finite had to exist, otherwise it would never exist. If the potential is not there first, it will never come to fruition because it doesn't exist. The concept doesn't exist. If a concept exists, there's a potential. So in the beginning, there might have been a potential for the finite, which is us. But before that potential was actualized, or in the process to actualize actually began, it was only infinite light in every direction equally forever. Think about that one for a little while. It's not possible to imagine, because whatever comes up in your mind is like, I see this, I see the sun, the light of the sun lighting up the whole sky, but the sun is mugbal. It has boundaries. It's in a solar system, in a galaxy, part of a universe. It's like it has boundaries. There's limits to how far it can go. It may fill an entire room with light, right? But that light's not infinite. That light is made of photons and waves, and it can be blocked. And it's infinite light. No idea what it means. The word, Ein Sof. It means, and that's, by the way, why we define it not in terms of what it is, but in terms of what it's not, because we don't know what it is. We only know what it's not, and that is, it's not finite. It's not boundaried, and that's all that existed at one point in time. Period. There's no world anywhere. We're not someplace, maybe in God's imagination, whatever that might have been at that time. Most of our relationship to God is after creation. With the God, the reality, the level of God, the aspect of God prior to creation is beyond grasp. But we still call it Or Ein Sof, which is literally the light without limit, without any end. And that's all we know about it. That's stage one. That's where it all began. Why did God decide to make something finite? Well, the only thing we know about that is because he wanted to do good. That's what it says. It's brought down that God, for some reason, and it makes sense to us, right? God's good. He wants to do good. But that's because we're living in a reality that has all of that. What is good, ultimately speaking? Well, no, we don't know. It's all within a closed system. Just like even mathematicians and physicists wonder if the laws of physics, which seem so absolute to us, because our whole universe runs by them without fail, if they actually were absolute prior to the Big Bang, which may have been a whole different level of reality, in which our rules break down. We don't know. They don't know, right? But the same is true. Is that whatever you're going to say, whatever you're going to bring up, whatever you're going to talk about, it's all within our system. It's all within our understanding, with all our mentality, no matter how high and how, even Kabballah, with its incredibly sublime, understanding of reality, is still a sublime understanding of a reality that exists inside we call the halal, which we'll get to in a second. Within the system that we're a part of. It's all we have. It's what God gave to us. So it's the truth as far as we know it. But you just have to understand that there's still something beyond that is, completely not understandable. And it's the basis of everything. Because Or Ein Sof, the light of Ein Sof, that is what makes everything. That is what sustains everything. We talk about God having made everything, makes everything, will make everything, that he's the source of life. No, there's no other besides him. It's all about the Or Ein Sof. That's his ratzon, that's his will. That's what he's using to make this all exist and to maintain it from moment to moment. It's just all Or Ein Sof, which is unlimited light, maintaining a finite reality. We don't understand how that works. We just know that it does, because here we are. We're talking about it. So he goes on to say, okay, shum chalal v'shum avir panui ela kohya Or Ein Sof. There was no reality, there was no hollow in which the world could exist. This whole world is existing in some time and space, wherever it is. Right? We know where it is in the solar system. We know where the solar system is in the Milky Way galaxy. We know where the Milky Way galaxy is with respect to other galaxies, all that, but we don't really know beyond whatever it is, where all that exists at all, except for the fact that it's inside God. So he goes on to say, when a time came, whatever that time was, that God decided he wanted to emanate reality. He wanted it to come into existence. That's what God decided. And then look at his watch. Oh, look at that. It's 9:15. Time to make reality. Time didn't exist. It was infinite. It was like, tomorrow I'm going to make the world. There was no tomorrow because there's no yesterday and there's no future. It's like, there's no present. For God, it's just all one reality, Or Ein Sof, infinite. So whatever it means that it went up in his mind that he decided to make reality, words. But that's all we have. That's what we're working with. Okay. So he says, and what's the reason why he decided to make the world? Why did he do all of this? with all the good and all the bad and all the complications and all the species and all, the countless, types of birds and bugs and fish and animals and humans and, stars and constellations and black holes and even, white matter, I think it's called now, and comes at the other side, right? And dark matter, you name it, all of that. Why? So he says, because God has names. He's called merciful. He's called gracious. He's called long-winded, like patient, and similar, right? Because basically, if there's no one here to whom God can be merciful, so what's the point of being called merciful? Doesn't mean anything. You have to have mercy on something to be called merciful. So that's one thing. The same when it comes to all other God's names. Every name of God has a mashma'ut, has some type of implication or idea behind it that implies another being, implies a reality, implies past, present, and future, things like that. So without creation, these names are meaningless. So what? Who cares? Does God care? No. Well, obviously, seems like he cares because he had to fulfill this. We'll have to see what that means. Okay. And at that point in time, God decided, okay, since I'm in dynamic reality, I'm going to mitzamsim my light. This is a very important Kabbalah concept that has been a discussion of many great Kabbalists over the time, because this is really, it all comes down to this idea of tzimtzum. The word itself just means constriction. So God said, now that I'm going to, the Orient Sof, the infinite light, when they decided at this point to make creation, so God said, I'm going to be mitzamsim my light at a specific point, right? Specific point in the center of infinity. Now that's easy to understand. Go find the center of infinity, and you'll find that it will take you an infinite amount of time to find it, because there is no such a center of infinity. But God knew exactly where he wanted to do it, and he did. So that in the midst of all this infinity, forever, equally in every direction, right? God found the point where he's mitzamsim his light, and all of a sudden, that one little point, finiteness came to being. Within this infinite came a finite reality. And it says, right? It's svivos v'tzadadim v'neshar chala b'ntayim. And he basically expanded it until it became what's based like the inside of a ball. And I mentioned last week that the ball is held in place not by some type of material, but only by the will of God. God wills that this thing called a halal, which is a hollow, should exist, and that's going to be the construction site of all of creation. And he's going to take us through it. But all of this is just for one reason and one reason only, that mankind should get to a point where he realizes and recognizes that God is God, ein od milvado, and as the Rambam puts it, we want to praise him all the time. And not because God needs anything, but somehow, and it may be hard for some to believe at this point, that that's our greatest pleasure. That's when we really feel the most fulfilled. That's when we really feel the greatest that we can possibly be. And there's the pleasure is insurmountable. And this is the starting point of all of it. So, B'ezras Hashem, next week we'll go into a little bit more deeply. Have a good Shabbos.
Thank you, Rabbi Winston. Everybody have a great Shabbos. Can you hear that echo? Everybody have a great Shabbos, and thank you. That was so informative, and we can't wait to hear next week. Okay, check out 36.org, everybody. Good night.